I'm excited to have a conversation, a generalized conversation. I mean, I know that we could spend probably, wow, I mean, hours talking about the construct of diversity, equity, and inclusivity and the intersections in our professional growth and how this work has evolved over the last 10 to 20 years. My name is Donya Perry, Service Vice President of DEI at the Raleigh Chamber, and within the Raleigh Chamber, we actually also house the Wake County Economic Development, which handles all the large economic development projects. As Courtney spoke about business development, this is a big part of the work of the Chamber, and we do it countywide. And so I serve as the Equitable Economic Development Director there. And it's interesting because I started this work back in 2018 with the conversation of what does equity look like within our community when we talk about its growth. And we'll talk a little bit about what equity means in relationship to diversity and inclusion, but the work started with talking about equitable economic development and how do we grow responsibly, recognizing that our community was an incredible magnet, but we had a really poor ladder of upward mobility. And so that's the construct that, we'll talk a little bit about equity in the workplace and how that's important to create, not only a workplace, but also a marketplace that is completely accessible, completely inclusive, and it really takes into account everybody's opportunity to be successful in the region. So, but I have to ask this question, and this is a question that I'm asking for you to be vulnerable, to share. So I acknowledge if you are not not willing to tell your story, or you just want to certainly just listen and participate passively. But I have to ask, from your perspective, and tell me a little bit about your story when you were the only in the room. Yes, absolutely. Wow, I really appreciate everybody sharing their story and also the feelings associated with it, and acknowledging in some shape, form, or fashion, we all also probably at some point felt as if we were representing for our identity, right? Our only identity in the room. And did you feel any pressure with that? Anybody? Yay or nay? A little bit of pressure? Yeah. And it's almost like if I don't get it right, there may not be another only, right? So I completely understand that and I acknowledge it. And so to be honest with you, this is sort of the background of why, why diversity, equity, and inclusivity is important. And we don't have to, really go deep and dig deep ad nauseum about why we do it. When we think about the benefits of DEI, easily known, it increases creativity and innovation. The more folks you have in the room, the more diverse ideas you have in the room, the differentiation in thoughts, ideation, teams we've seen have a marketed increase. And right here, diverse teams see a 60% improvement in decision-making. That's a huge piece. And then obviously inclusion is a big part because that increases, innovation as well by 83% based on this report. Another thing that we see, obviously, productivity increases. There's a great book by Stephen Covey called The Speed of Trust. And it speaks to when we talk about how do we build relationships within the workforce to create an environment that increases productivity. And just like this bullet point here, Harvard Business Review has found that when diverse teams made a business decision, they outperformed individual decision makers up to 87% of the time. And a part of that is when you're making a decision, how much do you trust your teammates and how much are they included when you build that personal relationship that then moves to professional. So those are important points. We also recognize, and you all know this intuitively, recruiting top talent. Glassdoor stated that 67% of job seekers said a diverse workforce is important when considering job offers. And we're seeing this also with our Generation Z and Generation Alphas. We're hearing more. I work with a lot of employers, and I have C-suite leaders, HR professionals tell me that younger professionals are asking questions during the interview about their diversity and inclusion, interviewing them about does your place of business stand on anything socially, engage in corporate social responsibility, engage in social justice. What is your DEI statement? These types of conversation. And even from an economic development standpoint, we have companies that are looking at moving into communities, and they're asking us, when they come into the community, not only where is the main highway and the best site and where the airport is, but also tell me about your the region as it relates to DEI. Tell us about your inclusion. In our community, we are still having to rewrite the narratives of poor policy around HB2 and the bathroom bill. So we're still answering questions about, are we truly inclusive to the LGBTQIA plus community? And so to recruit top talent, we have to be able to show and operationalize how does DEI manifest itself. Improve performance, that's another big thing. Again, I referenced it earlier, that more diverse teams, they typically have outperformed other companies. And so again, we stand on the intersection outside of it being the right thing to do, or rather good for business. It is also the right thing to do. And that's ultimately where we stand. So my question for you, when you think about DEI, right? Like, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Like, for instance, if I say horse, right now, you couldn't help it, right? A picture of a horse popped up into your head. Now, based upon your experience, if I ask you to describe that horse, your horse will look different, right? Somebody, Abby, you may say, my horse is a big black horse. And Mackenzie, you may say, my horse is white with black spots. And Courtney, you may say, well, my horse is brown with a white mane and it has a little horn. So it really is a unicorn. It's not a horse. So, we all have different ideations, right, of what DEI is. But when you hear it, give me a couple words that pops up into your head. I like to open it up to anybody. What's the first thing that pops in your head? Because I think, we can say that 30, 40, 50 years, the goal was equality. And we acknowledge that equality, means that we're all on the same level playing field. But, when we talk about equity in relationship to diversity and inclusion, I love this analogy by one of the amazing thought leaders in this space, Verna Myers. And you may have heard this before. Diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And I absolutely love this analogy because, ultimately what we're wanting to do, you can, Abby, Mackenzie, Courtney, you talked about your experiences of being only, and you were at the party, right? You were at the party, you were at the table, you were the only, but you were at the party. But the question was your voice heard? Were you asked to dance? Were you included? Did you feel well received? Did you feel connected? Did you feel empowered to speak while you were at this table? And so diversity, as basic as we want to call it, if everybody looks the same, nobody's going to have any different innovative thoughts. All right, let's just be very clear. And when we talk about inclusion, again, you can be at the table, but still not feel connected. When you look at this picture, how does it resonate with you? What do you see? All right, that is young Franklin. Okay, young Franklin was the first introduced Black character within the Peanut series by Charles Schulz. And if you look at this picture, does he look like he's included?
No.
Not at all. Now, signs of the time, this was actually a pretty controversial move for Schulz, who made this cartoon, and pressure from folks to say, listen, here's an opportunity for you to show, our country is in turmoil. This is during the civil rights era in the 60s and early 70s. And this was an opportunity for him to show that we were working towards diversity. However, the backlash that he was receiving, and also not wanting to be patronizing to Black people, he wanted to figure out how's the best way to introduce this character, but his bias still shows through, even though he had the well-intentioned, he had the good intentions, because he took backlash for putting a Black character in his cartoon. So he was being an ally, but we also talk about, especially with equity, well-intentioned people create inequities every single day. So that being said, what I like to include into the conversation of diversity and inclusion, the analogy from Verna Myers is not only be invited to the party and being asked to dance, but for me, the equity question is, how do people get to the party to begin with? You know, what are the barriers and what are the challenges for folks to be included, to be at the table, to be asked to be empowered? So for us, when we talk about equity, and this kind of speaks to, I think it was you, Abby, that talked about the cartoon, right? The apples. And I love this one as well, because I think it depicts the same thing. When we talk about equality on the left-hand side, that's giving everybody the same thing, regardless of their abilities, regardless of their orientation, regardless of where they stand, regardless of how they got to the party. Now, equity is recognizing and acknowledging the disparities. It's acknowledging some of the barriers. It's acknowledging that in order to give everybody an opportunity for their voice to be heard and for them to be valued in the workplace, then we have to actually remove barriers or build bridges. And so the second picture to your right shows an actualization of that. And so when we talk about diversity, we're talking about all types of diversity, from ethnic diversity to different ability levels, to learning difference, neurodiversity, veterans, second chance offenders, and all of those things. All of these areas, we're asking workplaces to be a melting pot of challenging some of the standards, challenging some of the norms, while you are creating said product or creating said service. The process to get to that place, to include all employees, is to understand what are the challenges in that workplace that you have to overcome. So for us, you know, when we talk about equity, I believe to achieve workforce equity for the most underserved and marginalized, there is a need to close the opportunity gap. And so when we talk about that opportunity gap, you know, where do you see from your experiences, where are the gaps in opportunity that you've experienced or you would surmise for most workplaces? You know, if we're talking about workforce equity, where are there inaccessible opportunities out there? Now let's throw out one. I think Abby, no, it was Mackenzie. You talked about being an engineer, correct? So when you think about engineering, one of the equity challenges are the talent pool of women and people of color being engineers. So how can a company solve that gap by supporting efforts outside of the company to help to increase STEM fields for our most marginalized communities? That's one way that we do it. Any other ideation here from you all? How do we challenge and how do we break, how do we create more opportunities and accessibility? I see puzzled faces. I love it. One of the great sayings of my old political science professor, Dr. Jack McLean, who's no longer there, he would tell me, he said, listen, he said, when we're trying to come up with solutions, I want you to brainstorm like it's nobody else's business. He said, when we're trying to figure out how do we travel from North Carolina to California, I do not want you to tell me planes, trains, and automobiles. I need for you to think outside the box. And so I started giving him examples like, you know, skipping to California, or digging trenches and building and pouring water in a trench and canoeing to California, getting a pogo stick and jumping to California. You know, all the things that in our mind, there's no way you could do that. But that's where you start to find innovation, is when you think outside the box. So I want you all to ponder that question about the opportunity gap, and we'll come back to it. So I want you all, somebody to read this for me. To actually be read, and all it is really about our subconscious and conscious processing. And why is this important? When we think about it, for the most part, you know, 85% of our brain power, not 85 to 95% of our brain power is subconsciously. You know, we process massive amounts of information that's being taken in, and we use implicit bias to filter and organize our information. So it is absolutely normal. Bias is absolutely normal. It's responsible for the bulk of our cognitive functioning, and reading is a subconscious processing skill. Now, conscious processing, we only use about 10, 50% of our brain. It's focused on our primary function as a species to survive and scan for threats. And it's also learning to read as a conscious processing skill. So understanding that, we have to acknowledge that part of the equity challenge, it really starts with our own assessment of our own bias, and us checking and being mindful about what does bias mean. So, implicit bias is, whether it's subconscious or implicit, is defined as the mental process that creates subconscious associations, attitudes, and behaviors. It is a normal brain function to develop a subconscious implicit bias towards people and groups of people based on characteristics such as race, ethnicity, gender, age, appearance, and sexual orientation. Now, what stands out to you in this definition? It is absolutely normal. We take shortcuts. Our brain does that. We make assumptions. People call it snap judgments. We see a scene and our brain says, I've seen that movie before. And then you project the answer. Or you may be hearing a story from one of your friends and they're telling you this story. And in your mind, you're thinking, I already know the end. I've heard this before. And we make an assumption of what the end is. And we value and devalue people based on these same associations. So it's absolutely normal. But the question is, for a workplace that is truly equitable, other than talking about infrastructure things to address those opportunity gaps, like looking at, increasing the pool of candidates from diverse backgrounds for STEM education. But we also have to look at what can we do interpersonally? What can I do as an individual so that leader who is at the table, who is not an only, for them to acknowledge and disrupt that bias to say that I want to engage fully Abby, Mackenzie, Courtney, and Anna. It becomes me as a leader to ensure that. So for us, when we talk about implicit bias, this is continuous education. I love this video that I want to show with you all, if you do not mind. Do you all mind if I show a video?
Not at all.
Okay, awesome. Well, this video is by a gentleman by the name of Destin Sandlin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Smarter Every Day, where he comes and talks about all these amazing things that he does and seen and shared. And so what we want to do is have a quick watch his video. Can you see my video now? Thumbs up if you can hear it.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels, every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. Okay, all right, just a second. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Yeah. Wait. No, you have to keep your feet on. Dude, all right, here we go. Just give it. Wait. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. And go. Oh, no! All right, back up. Okay, wait. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Go right off. Just keep your feet on the pedals. Hands on. Yeah, come on. All right, one more time.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you gonna give up?
No.
Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So he, in, how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult. It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child. All right, today's bike log. I can ride smooth, I can ride fast. I'm thinking the experiment is over. Okay, now I'm in Amsterdam, a city that has more bicycles than people. The question is, can I ride a normal bike now? I mean, I've spent all this time unlearning how to ride a bike. If I go back and try to ride a normal one, will my brain mess up? So I've tweeted a Smarter Everyday meetup, if you will, and I'm gonna see if somebody brings a bicycle and I'm gonna try to ride a normal bike. It's backwards, it's backwards. This was one of the most frustrating moments of my life. I had ridden a normal bike since I was 6, but in this moment, I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I proved is that I could only redesignate that bias. So what you're not seeing is just a group of people here looking at me, looking at the strange American that can't ride a bike because they think I'm dumb. But I'm actually 2 levels deep into this because I've learned and unlearned. All right. After 20 minutes of making a fool out of myself, suddenly my brain clicked back into the old algorithm. I can't explain it, but it happened in a very specific moment. I got it. I'm back. Oh, it clicked. Hold on, it clicked. I got it. Okay, there it is. There was the moment. Okay, I can ride a bike. I tried to explain this to the people around me, and they just didn't get it. They thought I was faking the previous 20 minutes, and I couldn't get anybody to believe me. That looked like I faked that, didn't it?
Yeah.
Just a fake. You think I'm faking. You don't believe me.
That's so weird. You were like, la la la, and it's full.
You think I'm lying, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
I'm not lying. I felt like the only person on the planet who had ever unlearned how to ride a bike, and I couldn't articulate it to anyone because everybody just knew that you can't forget how to ride a bike. So I learned 3 things from this experiment. I learned that welders are often smarter than engineers. I learned that knowledge does not equal understanding. And I learned that truth is truth, no matter what I think about it. So be very careful how you interpret things because you're looking at the world with a bias, whether you think you are or not. I'm Destin. You're getting smarter every day. Have a good one. Okay, if you want to support Smarter Every
All right. And that's a cautionary tale for you all. Don't wait to get my age. Go ahead and if you want to learn another language, go ahead and do it. If you're ready to unlearn something, you all, and actually Gen Z, Gen Alpha is really why I am extremely optimistic about the direction that we're going as a country in relationship to DEI. Because you all are unlearning and learning and unlearning and learning, and your brain is more plastic than some of us Gen Xers and baby boomers that are in leadership roles. And so it's harder for us in this whole backwards bicycle thing. It's going to take us a lot longer. So, you know, what I like to leave you all with a charge for me, I call it the 3 R's. You know, reach in, reach out, and reach over. Reach in is doing a self-assessment. And doing a self-assessment, and we all sort of do it in our own informal ways. That's acknowledging our strengths and acknowledging that there's areas that we need to do a little bit more work in. And so in doing a self-assessment, think about opportunities to gain, to learn and then unlearn, right? So for instance, the thing that stood out most for me in that space on that video was how long it took him. He said it took him 8 months to be able to ride it. So unlearning what you already know is not easy. It's going to take time. But when you do that self-assessment and you acknowledge that, hey, I want to address how I become a better ally in the workplace, or I want to be a good steward of and not perpetuate microaggressions or even understanding microaggressions. How can I support marginalized communities and folks within my workforce that have to code switch every day so that they feel accepted into the dominant culture workforce? You know, there are so much things continuing to push and learn about bias and how you filter and how can you disrupt bias. So all of those things are important when you reach in. The second R is how do we reach out? And reaching out is what I call working across difference. So reaching out means how do you connect to those that have different lived experience than you? You know, that folks that are that have come and have different perspectives. I call it JBOPs, judgments, beliefs, opinions, and perceptions. You know, we all come up with our own different JBOP. So the question is, how can I hear the story of someone else that helps me then unlearn the biases that I've had? So you need to take an opportunity. And I think the best way informally is to take somebody out to eat. I think the way we eat, where we eat, that's an all huge, big representation of our culture. Go have a drink with somebody, socialize, or go to their sacred space. So if they go to their place to worship, their place of worship, where they find solitude. You know, these are great opportunities for you to learn and gain experiences which again is a parallels with your desire to want to unlearn and check your own biases. And then the last one, which is reaching over. And again, that goes to understanding the equity challenges that are in the workplace, and then coming up with an intentional strategy. So for instance, you have companies that acknowledge that an equity challenge is a pipeline, the diverse pipeline into engineering fields, right? Mackenzie, I'm sorry, I have to keep, because this is so top of mind for communities right now, for companies right now. So if I see that as an equity challenge, what am I going to embed into my strategic plan that's going to deal with that to create an opportunity? If I acknowledge that pipeline isn't diverse enough. So that's where we're at. That's what I submit to you. And again, I appreciate your willingness to, one, be a part of this conversation. And for those that aren't on it live, for those that are going to be listening to it later, I appreciate your willingness to have this conversation, because one of the toughest things to do is to talk about things like race and to talk about gender and sexual orientation, to talk about marginalized communities. That's the hardest thing to do. And the reason why it's hard, because we don't practice. And that goes back to the backwards bite. So with that, thank you so very much. I want to open it up. And Anna, I'm not sure if we have enough time for questions, but we'd love to open up for questions, or certainly I could put my email address in the chat. And if you have any questions for me or want resources, please feel free to reach out to me.